All right.
So you played any more music since the last time I saw you?
Nope. Not other than at home. All right. Do you want a handout? Well, I guess I'll lift them over there, didn't I? Yeah, they're in there, so. All right. We're gonna get going.
He puts everything pretty much in his hands.
What have they got them?
Hmm?
Who got the handouts?
I just wanted you on one.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
All right, well, cool. Thanks for coming, guys. So we'll get going. So we're gonna kind of go over everything, planting potatoes today, all the core basics, answer any questions that you have. And truthfully, like I feel this, I always tell people this, I think this is the easiest crop there is to grow. If you have the fundamentals down, it's pretty hard to not be successful. And most of the time that I haven't had success personally, it's because of Mother Nature. You know, things that we can't control, too much rain, temperature, a lot of variables, but most of the time it has to do with outside factors that are out of our control. So,
What could cause him to plant? What did you have potatoes or?
I had the little purple potatoes, and I planted them in just a half whiskey barrel.
Mm-hmm.
And the leaves turned green,
Pretty green leaves.
beautiful green, and started to die back. I started digging them up. I had no bulbs,
Potatoes?
no nothing.
I've never tried to grow that specific variety, so I'm not sure, but maybe we'll figure out something that you missed
I
along the
bought-
way as we go
He
through.
had them give them to, I had a girl in Galveston, I bought a couple of plumeria cuttings for her, she gave them to him, and he was excited, because last year was his first year to actually grow anything in a
Yeah.
garden. So,
Well, I'll give you all the stuff that you gotta do to be successful today.
Okay, cool.
like I
So-
said, he's very informative.
So a couple things about potatoes. They're going to be a member of the nightshade family, so it means they're going to be in the same family as tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. And it's a really, really unique family of plants because if you think about the times of growing, eggplant and peppers tend to take a little more heat, can grow farther into the summer. Tomatoes fall in the middle, but then your potatoes are going to be a cooler season item. Interestingly enough, potatoes are going to produce more calories per square foot or acre than any other crop that you can grow, especially in a home garden. It'll outproduce calorie output over any grain or legume. So even on large scale farming, you can get more out of planting potatoes than you can other crops. So it's very easy to get a pretty substantial harvest. So they're going to prefer to grow when it's kind of cool outside, which is an interesting thing. They like to be around when the daytime temps are in the 60s, but nighttime temps are never below 32 degrees. But you think about like the time we're moving into February coming up, sometimes it's not always 60 something degrees in February. It really depends on the year. We've had a warm January right now, but we are starting to see those temperatures drop, and they are kind of aligning as we get into our ideal planting time, which we'll discuss coming up, that the temperatures are going to align. But also at the same time, we have to be mindful of freezing temperatures. A potato, because it's mostly water, you know, it has a high water content. If it freezes and it goes to thaw out, what's going to happen to it? It's going to rot.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure that they don't freeze, and that if we do get freezing temperatures past our planting time, which is not very common, but it can happen, that we have some way to protect them and insulate the soil to the best of our ability to try to protect our harvest. So we're usually going to plant our pre-sprouted potatoes, which are going to have eyes on them. So just kind of like, you know, you buy potatoes at the store and they start developing eyes after a certain time. You can see this one is the only one I have up here that's beginning to develop its first eye. We're going to want to have very substantially developed eyes, and we're going to usually want to plant those 1 to 2 weeks before the last likely frost. And that's sometimes very difficult to pinpoint here, but the ideal planting time for most years and almost all the time you're going to find people correlate potato planting with Valentine's Day, right around that time. And that's specifically why I always do this class 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time, so you're giving people plenty of time to go through the steps we're going to talk about and get everything ready to have them ready to go in the ground around that time, give or take a little bit. So potatoes are going to grow underneath the ground. They're a root crop, and it's important for them not to be exposed to light. If you get a bunch of exposure to light, then have you ever like cut open a potato and it's very, very green, or the skin begins to turn green? That's because it has heavy light exposure, and that basically develops characteristics in there that can be poisonous if you were to consume a lot of it. So you'll see people over time where they have green skin potatoes or a lot of green margins underneath when you're cutting them. Some people won't eat those. They'll throw them out or discard them. The last interesting thing is that your red potatoes are most commonly grown here in our region. They're going to have the longest storage value out of all the potatoes that you can grow here. So that's why you see them growing more than any other, is because the production is very high and storage is long. So why should we grow potatoes at home? Because, I mean, as most produce that you buy at the store, it's pretty cheap. Potatoes are pretty cheap. But at the end of the day, homegrown potatoes taste incredibly better. Secondly, we're controlling the inputs, and we know exactly what went into the soil, into the plant, and we know that if we are growing naturally or organically, however you want to label it, or if we're not, we know what we put in there, so that we're mitigating our risk of having, quality, healthy produce. For me, I grow because I don't want to grow with chemicals. I want to know what went in there, so I try to control as many variables as I can and try to provide things that I know is going to increase the flavor, the taste, and also that's going to produce the least amount of damage back into the soil and the ecosystem in my landscaping. Potatoes is one of the few things I think that you can actually come out ahead on when it comes to cost. You think about like how many really expensive tomatoes or other things that you might have grown in your time, and you're like, it wasn't really worth it. The flavor makes it worth it, but potatoes, we can turn $5 of potatoes into maybe 50 pounds, which when you think about the amount of money that goes into that, and even though they're cheap, we can still come out way ahead. So it's a win-win. Potatoes also, because they're growing underground, we're going to be leaving behind roots and organic matter. They're health boosters in the soil. So any kind of organic material that we leave behind after harvest is going to break down. It's going to feed bacteria and fungi, which is going to keep our soil healthy for the long term. Another thing, you can grow some varieties that you may or may not be able to find in the store. Some people have success like with the purple tomatoes or some of the exotic colored ones. You can't find those typically in the store unless you're buying like a bag of like bulk baby potatoes. I've seen like at HEB, I can get a handful. I can't go to HEB and buy a white potato that's not necessarily like a russet potato. So these are more like a new potato if I hadn't have already cut it. This is a red potato size, heavy producer, but it'll grow here. Whereas I can't grow an Idaho russet potato here. The conditions and the climate and all the elemental factors are not right. So we'll cover a little bit of that with variety coming up. And ideally, it's a perfect crop to start out the season in Zone 9A, which is where we're at. It's one of the first, pretty much for me, it's the first thing I plant at the beginning of every year. I end the year with my onions, I start the year with my potatoes, and I'm getting things going in the soil when nothing else is really growing, or I'm finishing up some of my fall crops, just depending on when I planted. So what varieties do we grow here? Now there's more varieties than what I have on the screen here today in the presentation, but the 4 common varieties that have always been offered as certified seed potatoes in our region are our 2 red varieties. We have Pontiac, we have Lesotho. Now, they can both be this size. I just got whatever they brought me today over here. So they can range in small to medium, some a little bit larger than this. but those are going to be your most prolific producers and give you the longest storage life. Next will be kind of one of the crowd favorites, but you don't see it planted near as much, and that's going to be like your Yukon Gold. You know, you go to the grocery store, gold potatoes are so common now, but the Yukon Gold here doesn't produce as much, or your yield will be smaller than if you were planting a red or a white variety. Then lastly, the white Kennebec. Probably what I sell the least of nowadays, but back whenever growing up, my grandfather was planting potatoes, and that generation of folks, whites were very, very prominent. They grew them just as much as reds, and they have a great flavor, and they also store longer than the Yukon Gold. So how do we get ready to plant? So it's fairly simple, but at the same time, some people get this part wrong. So you'll usually start seeing certified seeds in our specific area come in about 2nd to 3rd week of January. And potatoes will come into the suppliers, and then you'll see people start to get them between then and the end of January. And it's important to get them ahead of time, because we have, like this here, this is not ready. You know, it's just a potato, but we need it to begin to sprout so that we can know that it's on the right path to grow. If we just stick this in the soil and it's not sprouted, it might rot or something else could happen to it. We're trying to promote it to get roots growing and get our tubers growing before we put it in the dirt. So the best way to do that, at about 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks before planting, what we're going to do is we're going to get our potatoes, we're going to store them in an open area, or like spread apart, not necessarily in an open space, but we want them like spread out, like on a flat, like maybe like, you know, back when it used to be like an old soda flat. Nowadays I might use like a tray, like a seed tray or a nursery tray, something I can spread them out on, and then I'm going to put them in a cool, dark, and humid place. So where that might be is going to depend on your particular like setup in the house, and you kind of have to experiment with it. Way back when, people would put them underneath the bed, in a dark closet. I always used to hear some people tell me they'd put them in the return air vent in the AC because the airflow over it. You know, I'm not saying any of these are right or wrong places, but you're looking for the right conditions to get them to sprout, but you also don't want them to sprout too fast if you're not ready to plant, because if they sprout too fast, you know, it's just like having them on the shelf. If they sprout fast and they start growing, what happens to them? They start shriveling, drying, and then those are not going to be good choices for planting. So you kind of have to learn how far ahead you need to start yours, but for research and trial and error, you know, 3 to 4 weeks is usually a pretty good sweet spot. Now, if the potatoes sprout, we'll store them this way up until a couple days before they plant. Or if they sprout and they just have like little nubs, like this one's starting to get a little one, but they're not really, really prominent and developed eyes, then we need to move them somewhere where they're going to get a little warmer. We might be able to give it a little light. So what I'll do is I'll move it somewhere where we're getting up to like 60, 70 degrees, a little warmer, because the warm temperatures are what's going to cause the potato to start growing the eye faster. If you keep it in a cool space, then it's going to store for longer. And we'll see that as we get into storage a little later on. If you can't get them to, if they're not sprouting at all and the conditions aren't right, you can try pairing them with like a banana, an apple, or an onion. Those are going to release certain gases that will help to kind of deteriorate that potato and cause it to sprout and kind of speed up the process. But you'll put that in a bag and you'll close it up so that kind of those escape gases from those things can't get out, and that's what's going to help promote that potato to sprout. I tried this once, but I don't know whether maybe I didn't have the bag closed up, or maybe just something wasn't right. It didn't work for me, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work. Many people have had success doing that. So if about 2 weeks before planting, you can put them on a tray with a little bit of light or a grow light. What you're doing is you're kind of getting the eyes to start facing upright and growing upward. I don't personally do this step. This is something that I learned from a very knowledgeable Metro Houston area gardener. I've always had success without doing this, but this is something that does work for some people. So for me, all I'm doing is I'm looking for very prominent eyes. And on the next slides we get to, you'll see a picture of one. You know, a lot of times I want something that I can grab onto. So it's not just some little stub. I want it to be nice and developed. So up to 2 days before, let's say we got some good eye development on our potatoes. They look like they're ready. They're not shriveling. They're not drying out. They're not looking like they're rotting. Everything's looking good. Then what I need to do is I need to decide whether or not I'm going to cut my potatoes. So one of the things that we want to look at is the size of the potato in which you bought. So if I bought a bag of potatoes for planting and every one was like this, there's no cutting required. As long as I have 1 to 2 eyes, ideally 2 good developed eyes on this thing, then I'm going to plant it whole, just as it is. If I get into something about medium size and I have eyes on both sides, which I don't here obviously because these aren't ready, but we did this just for show, then I would cut this in half. If I have eyes on both sides, now I have 2 plants, 1 potato. So you're extending your ability to grow your yield with less. Now if we get a larger one, this was 1 potato, I don't remember where the pieces went, but ideally if we have a big one, we can cut it into quadrants or thirds, as long as we have eyes developed on all quadrants or thirds, or if not, we could cut it in half. But what that allows us to do, we could take 1 pound of potatoes and we could extend that into a 10-foot row. 2 or 3 potatoes could make 10 to a dozen plants, maybe. So you think about, I went from 3 potatoes to now I could get who knows how many, depending on the conditions and the actual harvest. That's one thing that makes these very, very easy to be successful with, is you don't really need that much to get started. I don't even ever plant 5 pounds. I'll just get what I have up here. It could be enough sometimes to get me started and get going. So once we get them cut, we mentioned earlier, these guys are mostly, you have a high water content. So what I need to do, and the reason I want to do it a couple days ahead of time, is I want them to begin to kind of scab and hill over. So these are cut. If I leave them up where air can flow across them, and I can get all sides, what's going to happen, and I can already feel on some of these, this one here, if you feel on it, it's already starting to kind of you can see it's starting to dry out a little bit.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen is it's going to dry out and it's going to kind of hill itself. And that's important because if we took it and cut it immediately, threw it in the dirt, when we're watering, the dirt's holding moisture, it rains, we're going to increase the chance for rot very quickly.
Okay.
So the next thing that we could do, if we want to mitigate the rot potential when we're putting them in the ground, we could just let them scab over, or we can take a little bit of dusting sulfur. So I just poured a little bit out on this plate. You can also use hydrated lime,
Okay.
either or. I always use sulfur, just maybe because that's what Mr. Gazzardo used to tell me way back when. And, I don't think one works better than the other. But all this is going to do, I'm going to take that cut surface, because it's got moisture in here, I'm going to just take it and I'm going to rub it in there. And what I've done is I've coated it. So when I let this sit out, just like I would if I didn't do this, this sulfur is going to begin to dry up and crust over, and it's going to pull a little bit of the moisture out of the top layer of this potato, and it's going to essentially create kind of like a scab, or it's kind of a Band-Aid effect. I'm protecting it from rotting. Sulfur also is a known fungicide, so it can help against pathogens and things like that. So it's the perfect thing for coating something that's susceptible to root rot or just rot in general. When it comes time to planting day, it's important, we've cut all these. That doesn't mean that we're not going to encounter some of our cuttings or our potatoes that are not okay to plant. So what we want to do, we want to take a look and we want to inspect every one of these. like this guy right here, when they cut this open, I would be leery about planting this. I don't know why there's kind of like this hole, it's almost like an apple core in here. I might be leery about this one, so whenever I was cutting this one, I might not even have prepped it. I might have gotten another one and put it to the side, you know, but it's just a preference. I'd be willing to try this, you know,
Yeah.
just depends. But I want to plant the
Would
best
you-
looking ones.
Would you cut that out before you planted it, or leave it as is?
If I would have cut it out, I would cut it out and then coat it
Mm-hmm.
with like the sulfur or the lime, probably prior to, and let it scab over. But it probably wouldn't have been a bad idea to maybe cut it out.
Okay.
But that's the first time I've ever seen that like that. So this is a new, interesting thing for me today. But I want to make sure, because I'm putting a viable potato in the ground, and I don't want it to rot. So I need to make sure that I have good quality, firm potatoes. If they're like slightly wrinkly, or they have a few little wrinkles, but they're still firm, they'll probably be okay. But if they're very wrinkly and they're starting to shrivel a little bit, but they're getting soft and I can press on the skin, and it's got more give than when I first bought it, I'm likely to put that to the side. So it's never also a bad idea to buy maybe a little bit more than what you intend on planting, just so you have some backups, because you're not going to have enough time to start this process over again. So up here we've got an example of somebody cutting a potato. As you can see, he's got these very, very well developed eyes on there, and that's what you're looking for whenever you're prepping them and getting them ready. I mean, they can be long. It doesn't matter. Those are more developed, and they'll be fine as long as the actual potato itself is fine.
Question.
Yeah.
I have a couple of sweet potatoes that a friend
I
grew
can bring that up too.
and gave to us. And I noticed a couple of them we hadn't ate yet is already starting to sprout, and it's got little leaves on it.
Mhm.
So when do you plant the sweet potatoes?
Sweet potatoes are planted differently. They're actually planted in April, and they're going to grow through the summer, and typically harvested in like late summer, maybe in early fall. So they're different. And yes, like sweet potatoes are grown very similar. They're grown by slips or cuttings. You know, they cut, like basically they slice it, and they're going to grow from basically a slip. So it's not uncommon. So what you see, you could grow that into another plant. Nine times,
Just leave it till April and
if it stays viable, yeah, I mean you can. And not to say you couldn't plant it earlier than that into some soil and then move it out. You can have to experiment with it, you know, because if it's inside, it's warmer and it's thinking, hey, it's time, but it's not really time.
yeah, I talked her into getting to the Master Gardener program in Montgomery County, and she's been in it probably 6-7 years, and she's had a blast. And we went by, she was having a hissy. She goes, "You need to come get some of these sweet potatoes. I got 3 different kinds that I grew." She was so tickled.
They're easy. Sweet potatoes, you put them in a bed, most likely you'll never find them all, and then next year they'll come back without having to do anything.
Really?
Just because you miss one, it sprouts and it grows, and next season. So they're always good. They're super easy, way easier. To me, they're even easier than this.
Are
But
they?
yeah.
They sure are good. Nothing on them but just bake them and eat them.
nope. So planting. Planting is kind of one of the most important parts, because potatoes don't grow like every other vegetable or crop out there. We have to think about how the potatoes actually form and where they form. So are you guys growing in a raised bed or in the ground?
Raise that.
Okay, so a raised bed, this is one of the few times a raised bed produces a challenge. So first and foremost, we need to look at how a potato grows. So what we're going to draw a very terrible raised bed. So we have all of our soil in our raised bed here. So if we plant our potato like we plant anything else, we're not going to get anything, because the plant's going to grow up here and there's no soil, because the potato produces all of your potatoes above the one you planted. doesn't produce down here. So
That's where I went wrong then.
so that's why I
That's it.
figured we're probably going to find a problem somewhere along the line. So when we're dealing with a raised bed, we have kind of a unique challenge. And this is the one time I hate raised beds because, so what I've got to do at home with my raised bed every year, I've got my soil in there. And what I got to do, I'm going to get me a couple 15-gallon nursery pots or so. Like if I got a bucket or a bin or maybe a wheelbarrow that's not getting used, what I've got to do is I got to come in here and I got to dig this bed out. It's the only time I ever do this. And I've got to get this bed down to the bottom. And I'm going to have about 4 to 6 inches worth of dirt in the bottom of my raised bed. Then I'm going to plant my potatoes. So I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to space them at 12 to 18-inch intervals. So depending on the shape of your bed or how you want to do it, you'll space them evenly. I've got them in here. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to cover them with about 3 to 4 inches of soil on top of the potatoes. So we're going to come back, I'm going to use my stuff I dug out, and I'm going to fill it back up. So I'm going to bury those in there. Those eyes, I want them facing upward. So I want to make sure that my eyes on my potato are facing up. I'm going to plant those in here, cover them up, and then now it's a waiting game. Now, I jumped ahead of myself a little bit this time by accident here, but before I get into planting, what I want to do is I'm digging out my raised bed. I want to be looking at my soil consistency. Is my soil loose? Is it clumpy? Do I need to make some drainage amendments in there? Because, again, rot is the worst enemy of growing potatoes, so we got to make sure our soil is going to drain very well, because the time of year we plant these, February into March, is usually characterized with heavy rains. And sometimes we get so much rain that we don't get a crop, and it's out of our control. So we need to make sure our soil, especially in these raised beds, are going to drain really well. If it's clumpy, it's not crumbly and holding or falling apart easily when we press it with our hands, we might want to add some form of drainage amendment, expanded shell, vermiculite, perlite, maybe some compost in there. But we've got to get that in there. I'm also, once I dig it out, one of the first things I'm going to do, I'm also going to give a little bit of slow release organic fertilizer, and I'm going to sprinkle some in there before I put my potatoes. According to the label, some people will do up to a half cup per square foot, but I usually just go along with my label using Microlife. Here is the one that we typically go with personally, but any slow release organic is my preference and recommendation.
What is that?
That's an 846. I usually use the multi-purpose, but we don't have any multi-purpose right now. So we got our soil in, we got our potatoes in, we're fertilized. Now what we're doing is we're waiting, and what we're waiting for is we need our plant to start growing. So what's going to happen here is we're going to get some growth, and it's going to peek out above the soil line, and we're going to have some leaves and some branches. And these plants are a determinate plant, very much like a tomato, so they're more of a bush type. They're going to put all the production on at one time, and when we harvest and we're done. So we're going to wait until we see the tops of our plants get about 8 to 10 inches above the soil level that we have. But once that's there, because we know that the potatoes are going to grow above the seed potato in which we planted, we're going to use that dirt we pulled out of our raised bed, and we're going to begin to backfill it again. And we're going to add a layer in, leaving the tops of our plants exposed 2 to 3 inches, 4 inches. We're going to leave them exposed. And what we're going to do is we're going to rinse and repeat this process until our plants have made it all the way up out of the bed, and now we have soil all the way to the top of our bed.
So that's where your potatoes are gonna grow.
So most raised beds are going to be nowadays, you're going to see the ideal size and common size are going to be anywhere from a foot to a foot and a half deep. Some people's beds are 2 foot deep, some are even taller. But for me, I've got 18-inch beds, so I fill it all the way up. Most of the production is going to happen in the first foot above the plant that I made. You may get some higher than that, but majority of your production is going to happen in the first foot of space. So once we get this all the way up to the top, what I want to do is I'm just going to let these plants grow. They're going to get tall, they're going to put on leaves and branches, and they're going to grow like any other plant that we're accustomed to dealing with. I do want to supplement nutrition because I got a lot of energy being used up to produce these potatoes. So we typically will supplement with a liquid because my slow release is going to feed for an extended amount of time, maybe 1 to 2 months. I may do this again a little later on, but I'm going to supplement. I can either mix this in a pump-up sprayer or a spray bottle, and I can spray the leaves, and the minerals and nutrition can be absorbed through the foliage, or I'll mix it up in a watering can because I don't have but 1 or 2 beds of these small space. Then I'll water it in, and it's going to absorb through the root like any other. I want to repeat this. Ideally, I like to do this about every 2 weeks. Because just like anything else, if I think about the weather, we're going to get a lot of rain. We might get some cool weather. Lots of rain is going to wash nutrition down farther out of the root zone. It's also going to, if it's getting cold and warm or there's lots of temperature sways, that can cause stress. Stress leads plants to maybe use up more resources than normal. So I want to make sure that I'm giving plenty of nutrition so that my plants stay healthy, and hopefully they'll get rid of some of the other issues we might encounter later on. So if, just in case, like one thing, like same thing happens, like so on a raised bed, it's no different if you're growing in the ground. When people are growing in the ground, they're growing on a hill, and they do what they call hilling, and they're pulling dirt from the hill or the row, and they're pulling it up and over the plant, and they're hilling, mimicking the same exact process.
Okay.
So we're going to repeat this process, like I said, until our plants are all over the top, and then we're going to just grow them like normal plants. General care, checking them out, making sure we don't see any issues, and we'll talk about potential issues at the very end here. What we're going to be looking for is for the plant to tell us it's dying. Just like onions, potatoes, we know when they're ready to harvest because the plant is going to be at the end of its life cycle. It's going to start to yellow, it's going to start to look poor, and they're going to begin to die. And then because it's a determinate plant, we know when it's at the end of its life cycle, it's already produced everything that it's going to produce. The potatoes are going to be probably as big as they're going to get. So what will happen, they'll start deteriorating, they'll start dying off, yellowing. I'll leave them in the ground for a couple weeks, just kind of letting that plant die, and some of that material in the ground, the potatoes are going to be able to be easily harvested at that point. We're just going to wait. Once we do that, wait a couple weeks, let the potatoes kind of cure in the soil. We're going to cut the plant off at the stem, leaving all the roots and everything else in the soil, and then we're going to basically dig them out. We can use like a fork, like a manure fork type situation, any kind of hand tool, and we're going to gently dig in there. We do have to be careful because it's a potato. It's easy to stab right into it. We don't want to cut the skin. We cut the skin. We're leaving it open for rot and other issues. But we're basically going to dig until we get everything we can find. I never find them all. You're always going to miss some. So once we get them pulled out, the number one mistake that people make is they wash them. They need to stay nice and dirty. You can see all the ones on the table. They're all still dirt covered on them. That's a protective layer that's helping keep them to where they're going to have a longer storage or shelf life for you. We want to keep them in a cool, dark place. it's super important, is the cooler possible. If you think like, although we don't have them here, root cellars. Root cellars provide long-term storage for all kinds of things. While that's impossible here, we gotta have someplace that's gonna stay cool so we can get the longest storage out of them. There are people out there that can manage to store some of these from their spring harvest all the way, and they'll save a handful for fall planting in August. It's not that easy to do, but it can be done. We don't want to store them in their fridge because the fridge is going to be too cold, and when the plant becomes too cold, it's going to convert a lot of the starches that are in that particular potato into sugars, and that's not what we want. So we can grow these in containers too. Like I talked about using 15-gallon pots to put my excess dirt in. 15-gallon pot is the recommended size, so this would be a good way to try like a variety that might not be as common here, like those purples. And you could try a couple and see how they do without wasting your whole primary production space. And get you a nice big pot, whiskey barrel, whatever you can find. Make sure you got good drainage in it so the water is going to go out. And you're going to follow the same steps. You're going to layer in a little bit of soil, plant them, let them grow, cover them, continue till you get to the top of the pot, and then you're waiting for the plant to end its life cycle so that you can harvest. So there's really no difference in how and the steps you take, whether you're growing in the ground, in a container, or in a raised bed. It's just some of the activities are just slightly different.
So as it starts to finally pop up the green,
Add another layer.
add another layer.
So you get about a couple
No
3 inches below
fertilizer.
I'll fertilize. You can fertilize along the way with a liquid, but if you're doing like a slow release, like dry fertilizer, this is going to be breaking down over months worth of time.
So just do the first
I do this the first time. You could do it maybe 2 months later if they're still growing or towards the end. That's fine. But I mostly focus on providing supplemental nutrition with like fish emulsion. Ideally something more balanced like this. So seaweed's going to be good for roots and minerals and hormones. Helps with the health of the plant. And the nitrogen is going to help me with the growth overall. So what kind of problems could we come up with? There are a couple diseases that you can get with potatoes. Number one would be potato scab. I've personally never seen this or had this presented to me by any customer. Potato scab is one of the reasons why they recommend not planting store-bought potatoes, because they say it's an easy way to transfer in potato scab from outside regions into your soil. Again, people plant store-bought potatoes in the fall all the time, but it's something to be mindful of. The number one thing that you could see in disease is going to be blight. Same thing that can happen with tomatoes. Blight happens from basically lack of airflow, high moisture, high humidity. There's no cure for blight, so if you do get it, you just got to kind of mitigate it. Make sure you're watering at the soil level. Water splashing can cause blight to travel up through the plant.
So if you happen to get blight, and just trim those certain leaves off.
If you can, and if you do trim them, you want to make sure you get you some alcohol, and you want to trim it. You want to like dip your pruners and sanitize them between every cut, because a lot of your pathogens like that can be spread from parts of the plant to another quicker by just pruning. And that's like, you get it. Usually it's going to happen from splashing from the soil up on the lower leaves. So one of the things that I always recommend is putting like pine straw. Once I get all the way up to the top of my bed, I'll mulch with pine straw, a nice fluffy layer, because when I'm watering, it's helping keep the soil from splashing onto the bottom side of the leaves, and that's the fastest way you'll get some of your pathogens to get up on the leaves, and then they work their way up with water. Aphids are going to be really, really common. If you're feeding on a regular basis, you're going to eliminate a lot of problems with aphids, because a plant that has plenty of nutrition and a robust diet, it's going to have a better immune system, and aphids cannot use every single plant. They need certain sugars and ingredients to be able to do what they need, and a healthy plant often will fend off a lot of your sap-sucking pests like aphids. The number one problem that I have every year is armyworms. You know, the name implies it all. If you got one, you have many. They're gonna be out there in the day. They're gonna be out at nighttime, and they're gonna be by the droves. So it's not one you can just go out there and like find it and eliminate it, you know, by hand or without spraying. So sometimes I will have to spray with BT, which is an organic insecticide specifically for worms and caterpillars. If I have to, I'll spray that, and it will help me eliminate the problem. The worm will continue to feed. They'll ingest the BT. BT is kind of it's a bacteria, and it causes the worm's gut to kind of rupture, and they die. So it's very interesting the way it works, but it's very effective. It's safer than, you know, most other chemicals or pesticides.
Yeah, BT stands for Bacillus.
Bacillus thuringiensis. I'll probably say it wrong every time, but something along those lines. But usually you'll see the armyworms, they'll be like at full plant development. So they're going to be in the later stages when the plants, you've already done all your hilling and filling in your beds, and the plants are sizable. I typically notice them as I get almost to the end of, you know, the growing season for potatoes. That's when I start seeing them. I'm like, okay, I got to do something. They're not ready yet. So I'll spray if I have to.
Do they attack down into the soil or just the plant?
They're just going to mostly eat just the foliage. I've never had them damage any kind of the potato, but they'll decimate some of the leaves. You know, you'll go out one day and everything looks fine, and 2 days later step out and it looks like somebody shot BBs through your whole.
Yeah.
You know, when it's not going to kill it if you make sure you take care of it along the way.
Worse than hornworms.
This is just my list of things that I use if you've got to get inputs. These are my recommended products that I know make me successful. But anything that's comparable to these can help you achieve the results as far as like soil that have good drainage, fertilizer amendments, and sometimes when I'm revitalizing my bed after I've pulled everything out, putting it back in, I'll always typically put a little bit of compost at the very, very top, revitalizing, getting some living nutrients back in there, just making my soil stay healthy. So that's pretty much the gist of everything. So what kind of questions do you guys have today?
What do
You answered mine.
What do you use mushroom compost for?
Mushroom compost, it can be used almost as a growing medium. It can be used, you know, like any other compost. Mushroom compost is kind of essentially like a substrate. It's what's left over after growing mushrooms. So I mean, it's a good product. I don't think it's the best compost personally. Now, do I sell a lot of it? Miss Donna is addicted to it. I think it has a lot of value, but when I'm looking at like compost for me, I'm going to buy something like leaf mold compost or something similar to that over the mushroom compost all day long, just because I think I get more value out of it.
All those leaves that we got 2 or 3 years ago that are in those plastic bags up there at the lake.
No, they're not up there at the lake, we brought them all home.
Right, but if you leave them in those plastic bags, over time, they will start to break down. And it,
You got 7 or 8 bags out there under the awning by the
Yeah,
carpet.
when leaves turn into compost, with probably some other types of that. Commercially, they'll add some other things to it to kind of expedite the process, but it takes a long time to get it going. But leaf mold compost is actually a bacterial compost, and it's very, very healthy. I've seen it bring some things, rejuvenate some plants and soils that were not well at all, and it's amazing some of the things you see with it. And people use it nowadays to top dress lawns or turf because it brings so much nutritional value and life back to the soil. They'll put like a 1/4 inch across a lawn and just kind of rake it out, where they make spreaders for it now. It's amazing what it can do. So I mean, high quality compost is definitely worth its weight in gold.
we have 2 white oaks that are probably 15, 18 feet that were planted years ago, but we had to clean out the raised beds because I have a cypress tree that the former spouse planted that it drops all that stuff, and I've been told it's not good for so we took a lot of the leaves out of the beds, and it had some of I noticed when he was.
Good leaf compost.
Yeah, some of the good leaf
But
compost.
that rascal's leaving this year. it's going bye-bye.
And it should've gone bye-bye, I should've gone out there and done something to it when you planted it. All those
Well, mine
cypress
only got
needs
on
What
to
other
go.
questions you got?